Welcome to our Bellmar Thanksgiving Assembly, remembering President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Today we will view the David Walper production of 4 Days in November, which chronicles all the events surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy 25 years ago. Even though we didn't live during the Kennedy years, we are well aware of the love felt for President Kennedy by our parents and older friends. It is our hope that today's assembly will motivate you to do the best in everything you do, as President Kennedy always did. President Kennedy asked that every American have an aim and seek high aspirations in life. Before viewing today's motion picture, Mr. Russell will make remarks concerning President Kennedy's impact on the American people, even today, the silver commemoration of his death.
Today we're going to remember a great 20th century American leader. We do this because he left an indelible imprint on the American presidency. And what was it about John F. Kennedy that interest remains high in him 25 years after his assassination? True, his spirit still tugs at us who remember him. His personality has a persistent presence in the American memory. Even young people who did not live through the Kennedy years will stop and pause when he appears on an old newsreel clip. All presidents who have followed him have been measured by his standards and images he expressed as chief executive, and none have equaled John Kennedy's style. President Kennedy was a glamorous man with elegance, the brightest of teeth, a keen mind and wit. You always saw a little boy in John F. Kennedy. With television, John Kennedy's charm passed through the lens and directly into the American consciousness. Being presidential has become synonymous with John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy simply inspired people. How did he do this? By his powerful rhetoric and sincerity in his voice. John Kennedy's oratory had a touch of artistry and the use of poetry. He said, even as a Massachusetts United States Senator, if more politicians knew poetry and more poets knew politics, I am convinced the world would be a little better place to live in. Poetry enlightens man and is powerful in speech and can stir men's blood, as John Kennedy did so well. Since President Kennedy, we have lost the art of eloquence in the speech of our public leaders. 25 years later, we still yearn to hear the words that will stir the blood, inspire, and motivate. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the eloquent man is inwardly and desperately drunk with a certain belief. Eloquence, along with competence, toughness, and compassion, and decisiveness, is the quality that we still hunger for 25 years after the death of the master of these qualities. We are entitled to see these things in our presidents. It is a quality that, along with deeper, grander, more meaningful human qualities it often reveals, will forever allow such presidents as Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Wilson, and Kennedy to stand out from the Fillmores, Pierces, Taylors, and Hardings among them. There is often a relationship between eloquence and conviction, between noble rhetoric and noble emotions, between high-mindedness and high-soundingness. There is something every schoolgirl and every schoolboy in their heart of hearts senses when they are first introduced to language, impassioned by its own convictions and resonant with the delight of its own inventions. whether the speaker is Franklin Roosevelt or John Kennedy. People realize, as we as a nation seem to have forgotten, that when someone asks us to lend me your ears, they are asking us to lend them our trust, our attention, and eventually our hearts as well. Let me give you an example of John Kennedy's command of words. It is September 12th, 1962, and President Kennedy speaks at Rice University in Houston on the nation's space effort. We meet at a college noted for knowledge, in a city noted for progress, in a state noted for strength, and we stand in need of all three. For we meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with the instruments of knowledge and understanding. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. The conquest of space deserves the best of all mankind. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. Today, November 22nd, 1988, I would paraphrase John F. Kennedy and ask you, why study history? Why do we present this historical lesson to you today? We do this because history promotes the invaluable mental power which we call judgment. And when students and parents and school boards ask why history, the best answer is still that one word, judgment. We demand it of all professionals. You demand it of your teachers. You demand it of your principals and lawyers and doctors. And yes, you even demand it of a football quarterback. And we need it most in the profession of citizen, which, like it or not, we are all born into. But again, we hear, why history? And why so much of history? What does the past have to do with preparing citizens for the next century? And the answer goes back again to judgment. And judgment implies nothing less than wisdom, a big word about human nature and society. Born into a world that everything we have is the result of the faithfulness and the ingenuity of the people who have gone before us, it takes a bone-deep understanding of how hard it is to preserve civilization or to better human life, and of how these have nonetheless been done repeatedly in the past. It takes a sense of contradictory qualities so as not to be surprised when failure teaches us more than victory does, or when we slip from triumph to folly. And maybe most of all, it takes a practiced eye for the beauty of work well done in daily human acts of nurture. History, along with biography, and literature, if they are well taught, will help all of us in the quest for good judgment and the ultimate triumph of wisdom. This morning we exercise our minds in a study of history and biography. 25 years ago, John Kennedy spoke to us from the near side of the generational divide and flaunted his youth with self-assured charm. He was a special sort of president. Kennedy's eloquent words were the magic ingredient. And the way to measure a myth like that of John Kennedy's is to ask the young, and the not so young any longer, about presidential greatness. And in almost every poll, John Kennedy ranks at or near the top, outrunning, for example, even Harry S. Truman, who served twice as long, accomplished twice as much, but who probably will never get his face on the $50. Again, the question is why? Kennedy looked, acted, and behaved the way most Americans expect their president to reign. And John Kennedy's continuing hold on the national memory also rests on the lingering national guilt spawned in Dallas on that November 22nd, 1963. And with John Kennedy's death, the United States as a nation lost her innocence. And what followed were more assassinations. Robert Kennedy, his brother, Martin Luther King, the Vietnam War, the only war we lost, Watergate, and the first president to resign in our nation's history. And isn't it strange, and isn't it a strange trick of history, that the only president to resign was the man John Kennedy defeated for the presidency, Richard M. Nixon. And from 1963 through 1980, it seemed that everything went wrong. And the loss of John Kennedy is even greater in retrospect of what might have been. Many people believe that had he lived, America would have been spared much of its self-doubt in the 1970s. But he has achieved in death a mystical communion with generations then unborn. What matters is that the Kennedy myth continues 25 years later to animate, to rouse, and to motivate. And in the 1980s, when so few possessed the power to kindle the inspirational fires, the Kennedy myth still stirs the passions of those who find little inspiration in their symbols, in other men, or other presidents. What John Kennedy was unable to do for his country in life, he has been able to do for his country in memory. In that sense, the torch he grasped more than a quarter of a century ago has never passed to a new breed of leaders. Magically, John Kennedy rises above the generations. He is revered today because of his youthful sparkle, his athletic demeanor, his natural manner on television, his ability to let down his hair with his young children. He was the example of what America hoped to be: confident, strong, optimistic, and compassionate. I stand before you today because of President Kennedy. A youngster of 10, I lacked direction in life until he sparked the fire in me. And heroes are vital to a society. Heroism serves as a basic need in people too, with the example of one person's deeds which create and sustain collective meaning, inspiration, and hope. Heroism confers meaning and inspires human effort. And John Kennedy is a legitimate hero in our society today. And some will say we do not need heroes, but we know better. For our society needs inspiration and motivation. And our heroes provide that necessary human force for accomplishing great deeds. Listen to an opinion offered by a Kennedy historian, Arthur Schlesinger, Jr. Lifting us beyond our capacities, he gave his country back to its best self, wiping away the world's impression of an old nation, of old men, weary, played out, and fearful of the future. John Kennedy taught mankind that the process of rediscovering America was not over. He transformed the American spirit. And now today, we're going to look at the David Wolper production of 4 Days in November. Thank you.